This is Xela, the runner of this category of this run.
And this is Awein, I'm a commentator.
And this is golfkid, I'm also a commentator.
And I'm MoleTrooper, I also run this game.
So this run is part of the game N++. It's the successor to a Flash game just called N that was released in 2004. And this is the new version that was only released on Steam just a couple weeks ago. It's been out on PS4 for about a year. And this particular run is the X row, which is considered the expert row. It has 100 of the hardest levels out of over 1,000 in the game. And this is a speed run. The category is pretty new, mainly because the game itself is new. There's not been a whole lot of competition, but this run is really, I think, will hold up fairly well just because of the difficulty of levels.
Throughout the run, you'll be seeing the character, the ninja, manipulated in certain very advanced ways. This game is two-dimensional, and it's very heavy on platforming, and there's a lot of ways that you can manipulate the ninja's momentum, and he'll showcase this throughout the run here.
And as you've seen so far, xela is not collecting all of the gold, so this is considered a any % run. The only goal in this is to finish each level in as fast a way as possible.
And to do that, you need to grab the exit switch key and then reach the exit without dying.
Most of the objects you see on the screen are actually lethal. There's gold pieces that add time to your timer bar, which is basically your life. And if you go for high scores, that's also the score it registers for the high score on the leaderboards. And then there's a couple other objects that you can interact with that mostly just influence your movement. But basically, other than that, any other object you see in the game is lethal in some way or another.
So each level you see is a pack of 5 levels. So right now he's on XO2, and he's done 10 levels so far. Each of these has 5 levels, and he's only died once so far. He just died on the 11th level for the first time. Before then, it seemed to be basically flawless, and so far it's a fantastic run for some perspective.
So dying in this game is pretty common because of the ridiculous difficulty, which is ramping up throughout the run, up to the last episode, which most people take hours to complete a single level in it. And so this run will feature some death, but most of the time the routes I use are pretty safe, or at least semi-safe, to avoid unnecessary deaths, because then I'll need to restart the level, and that would take a lot of time.
Also, if you fall too far, you also die. So you'll see that he grabs onto the wall at certain periods of time to break his fall.
Another way you can survive a fall is by landing on a slope. So if you fall straight down onto a flat surface, you'll die. But if you fall and you land on one of the 45-degree slopes in the game, you'll actually survive because your speed is coming down on an angle instead of straight onto that slope.
Yeah, so the movement in this game is very much based on momentum and interacting with the tiles in ways that give you lots of it, so that you can go as fast as possible. So it's not like your standard platformer where you press a button and you move a certain amount, you let go of that button, you stop moving. It's you press a button, that gives your character some momentum, and then that character keeps moving in that direction until you change that movement with another input.
So this game is limited to 3 controls, which are just running left, right, and jump. But because of that momentum used in this game, it's very complicated and has a ridiculously high skill ceiling, So most of the advanced techniques can only be learned after like playing hundreds of hours and practicing in very many different levels.
In this level, you'll see there's copies of himself, and if he runs into these copies, he'll immediately be killed. So he has to manipulate how they move, and then avoid them when he goes back around.
And as you see, the safe strategy for just simple completion of the level is you pick one route and you just follow it. If you were playing this for more of a high score, to get all of those gold pieces, you'd have to do many different routes over each loop around that circle. And that's where it gets extremely complicated very quick, is trying to keep track of what have I done the last 2 times before, and what do I have to do to avoid it now.
So these little circular enemies you see are fixed enemies that move in a fixed way. They're called drones, and he just has to learn the patterns of all drones he sees so he doesn't run into them at any given time.
There are also more advanced enemies like the rockets you saw in the last level, which follow the character with a specific turning rate, which makes them easy to hard to manipulate, but you can use that in many levels, and you will see them often enough in this run.
So this level he just finished has a combination of those mines and the evil ninjas and all that. So some levels combine all of these things in very devilish ways.
And the level design in the game is actually really well done. As you can see in this level, it slowly introduces you to the different configurations of enemies in the same hallway, and to finish the level you have to maneuver through all the combination of all those enemies.
So when he hit that exit switch, he had to make sure that he wasn't too high when he fell down, which was actually harder than it looks, because if he's just a little bit higher, he might just go splat on the ground.
Yes, that's another thing about managing your momentum. If you go too fast and you collide with something, you're just gonna die.
And that
So
actually...
it's not just about going as fast as possible, you also have to, regulate it a little bit so you don't just go splat when you hit something.
And that counts not just for falling, it also counts some of the places in this game you can build up some pretty ridiculous vertical speeds going upwards. And if you're not careful and you go too fast climbing walls, you hit your head on the ceiling too fast and you die. That's not really ever a factor in this particular run, but it does come into play in other parts of the game.
As we talked about earlier, as episodes having 5 levels in each, there's time that's cumulative for each episode, and the gold adds these little objects that are yellow that are called gold add 2 seconds per gold. So at a certain episode, I believe that he has to get a little bit of gold to make sure he doesn't run out of time, and certain things like that. As you see, he's getting a little bit short on time, but that's the end of the episode, so he had enough time here.
So in some levels it's necessary to collect a bit of gold when it's on the way of the fastest route, but most of the time 90 seconds is enough in a speedrun to survive.
So right there when he was falling, you saw definitely a more advanced technique for surviving a fall. If he had just fallen straight onto that little platform, it would have been an instant death, but instead he caught just the very corner of it. And corners are coded as not exact corners, but as actually rounded with a very small radius. So because of that, he fell on a round portion that was not a flat, so even with all that speed, you're able to survive.
It's basically like landing on a very tiny slope.
And there's
Which,
also,
as mentioned earlier, also breaks your fall.
and there's also a more advanced technique, which is corner jumping. That's like jumping onto a corner and then pressing jump in a very small time window of just a few frames. So you get upwards momentum and horizontal momentum, which can be used to skip certain parts of the level or just get you faster or higher than you could normally get. Some levels feature additional gold, which can, for example, in this one, be locked behind additional switches, which are not required for this run. So they would just be ignored.
This level, as you see, requires some pretty close manipulation of the rocket as you're falling to be able to quickly get the switch and get back out without dying. And even though this is a very good run, you were able to see just how difficult that is because it wasn't done first try.
Yeah, so there aren't really any skips or anything like that that would allow you to skip past sections of the game. The difficulty of the run just simply comes from the mechanics and the level design.
Being some of the hardest levels, there are quite a few in this run that feature just a very large number of drones that they all move in a fixed pattern, but a lot of the time it's very small time windows that you have to make your way through. And the difficulty comes in learning the patterns that they move in and figuring out what kind of time you need to be able to make through.
This is a good example of that. So I need to time where exactly to jump between the drones. So I get the least possible amount of jumps to reach the exit as fast as possible. This is an example of a pretty long level, which doesn't have a good amount of difficulty. It's just this jump I make through the mines has a bit of difficulty, but earns me like a second. And there's another trick to need less jumps to get up there, which could hit the mine, but it's safe enough to implement in the run.
And this particular level is almost more of the kind of level that speedrunners tend to hate of a side-scroller. You're just stuck waiting for the opening in the big long train of drones, and you just have to survive. This ball that's following them is called a death ball. It's one of them that does not have a fixed route, it just follows wherever you are.
Here's the first fairly tough level with these evil ninjas, and you have to navigate in a way so you don't hit the ninja, and there's 4 separate rooms here, so he has to be quite careful so that he doesn't lose a lot of time.
And with every room I travel to, the amount of the ninjas increases. That makes it important to set a route in which I can deal with all the ninjas.
There are a lot of things that go into routing this game. As simple as it looks, there's a lot to consider.
For example, for this level, I decided to wait a bit to get the drones in a line that is easier to dodge because of the otherwise very high difficulty and high probability to die on those drones.
Even though it didn't take long to go through that level, you could see one of the really interesting features of the death balls is those are really the only enemies in the game that interact with each other, or anything that is not you. If they get close enough and they touch, they actually bounce off of each other, which can make them extremely unpredictable on what's going to happen.
This level is probably the hardest, or at least one of the hardest in the game, in the speedrun, because of the sheer amount of drones, of their sometimes strange pattern or timing. So I'll need to wait at some points, like this point, to get these drones I just jumped to not be on top of the block. And this is a fairly slow but reliable route, just to not die on this, because if you die at the end, that takes minutes away of your run, which is a very important part of the game, just to be safe enough that you can do it without death. This is another good example of having safe, or at least safe enough routes, because there are several times where I could skip some drone timings, but that would mean a higher difficulty, which could be lead to a death in this long run, which would take just too much time away. So at this point, I'm just gonna wait for 2 seconds to be sure to have a safe route.
And some of this game's difficulty, as you can see, is, there's kind of two optional difficulties. There's the difficulty of completion, which for a lot of people is hard enough. But then there's also the optional difficulty of collecting all of the pieces of gold.
Which won't happen in this run, but it's a cool way to add some difficulty if the game feels easy or too easy on a casual playthrough. But the gold is just too hard to do an RTA run to be anywhere near consistent, so just complete the levels.
So this level here is pretty much a nightmare in a speedrun. You want it to go exactly as planned, or else you're going to be improvising, or you're going to have to use a backup strat.
There are certain levels in this game which are easy to complete, like this one, but have very hard gold placements, which make it a nightmare to get all gold on, which is not as important for this run as in general gameplay. This is another example of learning drone timings and where they are going, just to avoid a death at the end of the level, which would take so much time away. This level looks pretty intimidating with 4 rocket launchers, but most of the time when you stick to your fixed route and don't mess up the timing, they can't reach you, so you can just run and do your standard route. This level featured a new technique, which is a bounce block double jump, so I can just fall from a high distance on the bounce block and then press jump twice to get additional high, which is used sometimes in this run if it's necessary.
So as you can see, part of this level, the difficulty is being able to make your way through parts of it fast enough to get to the next safe spot so that the laser that's rotating around that large block in the center doesn't get
and
to
here
you.
we see the first costly death of the run. So far the run's been fantastic, and this probably lost about 15 or 20 seconds.
But a run without death would be really rare, and they have to be considered to have in a marathon run.
With 100 levels, and most of them are really hard too, it's not gonna be easy to get a deathless run.
This is another example of a not so difficult level, but it has it can break your run by just activating the wrong mines, so you have to carefully learn your route so you don't lock yourself out.
And even still, those jumps, the gaps, even though xela makes it look very easy, it's actually pretty small gaps and not that easy to make it through.
Yes, with the momentum-based movement mechanics, you have to be moving at a specific speed before you hit that jump, so you go through that gap in the mines in just the right way, instead of just running too fast into them or going too slow and hitting the top one.
And here is a very good example of seeing how you manipulate your previous paths to be able to avoid your past self in the form of the evil ninja.
This is again one of the worst levels in the game, in the speedrun at least, which features a lot of rocket launchers, like 8 or 10. It's very important to have a good route for this. Yeah, I died once on this.
It's a very challenging level, and he makes it look easy. He's just barely avoiding the rockets. He does that all the time, and it's completely planned.
It was a second death, costing pretty much, but this is again to be accepted in such a long run. So the good time comes from me finishing the later levels, like the 18th and 19th, the two last episodes, without dying once. That was a huge time improvement of several minutes over my personal best.
And there we go. Very good.
Some levels require the player to wait at certain points, like in this one, in the last one, where I had to wait for the laser to not roast me on the way back.
And other levels like this one, even though you go through the same area 3 different times, you need to vary your route, because everywhere you touch becomes lethal with the mine. So you can't just use the same technique, the same pattern for all three go arounds the loop.
So these death balls, the blue balls in this level, are pretty dangerous when they come in lots, in big numbers, and when they get near each other, and they can bounce off each other and just mess with your run and with your route, because you can't plan that. This was a bit messy. I missed the timing there.
So there's always a bit of reactionary play in this game, because you can't 100% do the exact same thing every time. So the enemies have intricacies to them that you just have to react to, that you can't necessarily plan for every time. Like said death balls, they will bounce at different times when you move even slightly differently, so you just have to react to that.
And a level like this really tests your movement abilities. For going down, you're extremely restricted in where you are able to go in order to keep progressing downwards, as is necessary to complete the level.
This level features a swamp which you need to grab onto and cross this very narrow path, which are very precise jumps.
And the side that xela was jumping on, obviously he was safe, but the side opposite that was colored blue, if you touch that, you die. It's electrified and it zaps you.
It's a really cool enemy because it can kill you, but it can also help you get across the places you wouldn't otherwise get to.
This is a very good example of testing the jumping mechanic of the player. It is very hard for casual play, but not a bad level for speedrunning.
This level is very long, so if you slip up and die, you're gonna lose a lot of time. But
Coming
most
up
of the
here, you're gonna see
jumps are
some
simple in themselves. It's just an endurance test.
So these are just crazy jumps here, but he's used to them. But they're very impressive.
At this point, I noticed being too slow. It's a pretty precise jump, so I decided to try it again, which is safer than dying on such a long level. Some of these levels are easier than others and have a safe route which has not a high difficulty, but it's only right before very difficult ones. So I'm not touching the right toggle mines to have a jump on the way back, which saves a lot of time, maybe a second or 1.5.
So on this level, he has to get these unlocks that unlock doors that unlock more unlocks until you get to the exit switch. So that's why he's running back and forth. And the entire time there's a rocket chasing him. And so far he seems to be avoiding it very well.
It wasn't difficult on this level. Rockets are the worst enemies when it comes to narrow paths or having to change direction. On this level you just run around, it's not very difficult. So this level features one of the nicest tricks, jumps between mines, which is one of the hardest tricks in the game, and I do like 3 of them after another, which is very difficult and not suggested for beginners or casual players. But it's still, even if I mess up, it's still much faster than doing it regularly.
Yeah, that was a beautiful display right there. And then right into a level where it's basically an auto-scroller survival test. He just has to avoid this rocket and wait for the drones to clear out on the bottom.
And these platforms that he keeps using and that go running away and coming back, when they're stationary, you can interact with any of the 4 sides. But as soon as you leave that side you touch, as you can see, it just shoots away until it hits another tile. And while it's in motion, going away and coming back, if you touch it at all, it's another one of those times where you just die.
At the end of this level, I was a bit too early, like 2 seconds, so I needed to avoid the rocket by going to the wall, which was very risky, but part of the game, improvising. If I had died, that would have cost me a minute, which would be very devastating.
And running across the thwomp like he did there to finish that last level, if all you do is hold right to run, you actually run faster than the thwomp moves, and you run off the front leading edge of it and fall into the lethal blue side.
So getting out of the chamber with the exit switch, this chamber is a pretty hard jump. I need to get enough speed to survive until the laser drone is finished shooting. That's a very narrow time window, only very few frames. You need nearly perfect jumps to do that. Another one of the longer levels where you can increase your time by applying cuts through the drones where you can just skip them, but it's like I did there. But it's very risky, and if I do that, delay the drones and die, that costs so much time. That's why I'm not trying it. Just once. Okay, twice. It's still risky to do. This level tests your control of momentum very great. It has some of the hardest jumps in the whole run, and featured at the end of the level. It really tests your control of the ninja.
Like that particular gap there is very difficult to squeeze through, especially when you're having to essentially change the direction of your movement in midair.
And then if you don't hit the wall afterwards, you will die from falling too high, so you need to grab onto the side of the wall, which is also not very long. This is another level where you have to wait a bit. You still need to get back to the middle part to lure the thwomp back again, so you can still exit the middle part. If you would not do that, you couldn't enter again. It's a difficult level when collecting all the gold, but not hard when speedrunning. So far, I've made up more than 4 minutes in this run, which is pretty good. Mostly on the more difficult levels. For example, the auto-scroller we had a few levels ago. And on the last levels, which are to come. This laser turret on the left aims for you, and when you are moving specifically, it will shoot you.
And this is another level where you have to traverse the same, this time it's a vertical path, just straight vertical, and you have to do it, 4 different times, but you can't do it the same way anytime.
And here was an episode where he purposely collected some gold to make up some time.
This is the episode where time is the biggest problem. If I would not collect gold, it might be possible that my time runs out and I would not or only hardly be able to finish the run, the episode. Because there's at the last level of this episode is a large auto-scroller, which takes a lot of time. So this death ball can block the entrance, which would be very bad. So this is a large auto-scroller. I purposely collect all the gold in this level, just to be sure. I've collected enough, so it will be enough to survive this.
The way this level is set up, each of those little small micro drones have a different length of a path they run back and forth on, so the pattern that you have to deal with and dodge and stay alive through is constantly changing. It's the same every single time you play it, but it's also at the same time always changing, and you have to constantly update what your technique is or what your strategy is to stay alive.
And it's also important to keep an eye on when the door is open and the drone train is gone. So this level features a lot of evil ninjas, but they are not a real problem. This is a good example of using different routes so you don't come close to evil ninjas to minimize the risk. Coming up is a very difficult fall, which needs a precise timing to not hit a mini drone.
So here he actually has to lure this rocket all the way back, or else the thing will shoot at him again as he gets to the exit, so he purposely keeps the rocket alive to this point to complete the level.
This is an example of a level where I need to waste a lot of time, so the drones will leave their chambers and I exit the exit switch and the exit.
But because of all the evil ninjas that are following, you can't just stay in one spot, or else they'll all stack up, and when the first one reaches that spot he sits at, he'll be dead.
Coming up is the last episode with some of the worst levels in the game. Especially this one. It has a lot of drones and you need to switch the side several times, which makes it very difficult. And if you mess up a little jump or miss a little timing, you have to improvise the rest of the run, which is very hard. Gladly, I don't die on this run, on this level. But you saw I took a bit of time there.
And for most of the level, the evil ninjas are optional. But when you open the exit at the end, you have no choice. So that adds a little more element of, you can't just sit and wait around for a drone to move out of the way that you'd like. You have to keep moving.
This is the second last level. It features a lot of drone paths I need to cross. It's more like a test of concentration and precise timing. Gaps between the drones are not very big, so we only have a quarter of a second time to go through them.
And here we go into the last level. Now here he has to avoid this rocket while navigating all the way to the exit switch and all the way back. And this is one of the hardest levels in the game, and it's definitely worthy of being the last level.
It's also my favorite level in the game. It requires some really precise manipulation of the rocket because you can't jump almost anywhere, which makes it really hard to dodge it a lot of the time.
Yeah, every single movement he makes here is planned.
Yourself as possible, so you get time to traverse the level and then keep doing that, making it go away for a little while so you can move.
So this run was really great, improving my personal best by 5 minutes, which was lower than my sum of best segments before. That's mostly because I haven't died much. And that was the run.
Yeah, that was N++.
Thank you very much for watching.